rolling French landscape. These grassy hillocks were once First World War trenches, running red with the blood of soldiers. They are riddled with evidence of the early telephone's use in warfare.
Look at this here. Wire, 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 wire. Incredible.
These thin strands played a role on one of the bloodiest days of the war. A day that no man's land, a team of archaeologists, forensic experts and historians are digging deep to find.
This position was dug by us and used by us. So our ammunition there is 1916.
Revealing the unlikely connection between three brothers from Newfoundland and a missionary doctor, a man who fought to save lives on July the 1st, 1916.
Surgical thread. The only person to have this is that man.
A medic on the front line, in the slaughterhouse that was the first day of the Somme. These fields at Beaumont Hamel in France are the most visited site on the Western Front. One of the few places that Great War trenches and shell holes can still be seen. This is how the battlefield looked when war ended in 1918, now grassed over. But what did the trenches look like in 1916, on the first day of the Somme? No Man's Land, a team of archaeologists, historians and forensic experts want to find out.
I think it comes through more or less where I'm stood, and somewhere about here it turns a corner towards you in this direction where I've painted it. And
David Kenyon is a commercial archaeologist. He is looking for a very special trench, a communication trench called Carlisle Street. It was the main thoroughfare to the front line for troops and supplies from the 88th Brigade, and a way home for their wounded being brought back to the aid post. Archaeology, digging down into the dirt, goes from the present to the past. The past they're looking for is 1916.
We've got here the load of British 303 rounds, and there's another 5 lying there with an iron charger on the bottom. These things were issued in cotton bandoliers, and in each pocket of the bandolier are 2 charges of 5 rounds placed nose to tail, like that. And so you've got 10 rounds there, and then this has been discarded and it's fallen in a heap, and so you've got another 10 rounds there. And I suspect if we dig around in this area, we'll find all 50.
This is the first time that we've ever, that I'm aware of, found a full set of equipment. We've found components of equipment, all sorts, but never actually found what here appears to be everything. So we've got an adjusto, we've got the end of a strap. We've also got the rounds themselves. 15 of them in 3 charges, tells me that pouch was full. So we've possibly got a full set of equipment either being worn or simply been abandoned.
In a war where ammunition was vital, why would a soldier ditch his kit? One possible reason was medical treatment.
If a man's wounded up here, the stretcher bearers aren't going to carry all his kit back. They'll strip the casualty, firstly to get at the wound and treat it, but also just for the sake of weight. And a lot of stuff will be left, the men will be removed, but all their gear will just be lying about here.
If the bandolier was thrown away by medics rushing badly wounded men back from the front, the team could be looking at Carlisle Street, the main trench route leading back to the aid posts. The team may have found a machine gun nest. They've uncovered hundreds of British-issued bullets, 303 rounds that could feed the Vickers machine gun. Each bullet is stamped with the date of its manufacture, but if the dates are later than 1916, the team is digging at the wrong depth. Luke Barber, a forensic archaeologist who usually works crime scenes with the police, is in charge of the evidence.
The British ammunition we're getting from this site, a lot of it is fired. Most of it seems to be 1915 dated, so that's about right for the Somme offensive. But we've also been getting 1916 dated as well. There's nothing really earlier than 1913. So it rather suggests that the British Army has not got large stockpiles. They don't have the supplies.
Luke's time and trouble pay off. The bullets show the trench is British, and the depth they're digging at is confirmed as 1916. At this stage of the war, the Allies' plan was to push the Germans back. On July the 1st, 1916, 750,000 Allied soldiers prepared for battle, stretched out on a front running almost 20 miles north of the River Somme to just south of Arras. At Beaumont Hamel, British troops, including the Newfoundlanders, were crammed into trenches poised to launch a staggered mass attack. But it all went wrong. By the end of the first day of the Somme, more than 57,000 soldiers from Britain and her colonies lay wounded or dead. The sheer number of bullets found suggests they're getting close to the carnage.
In he goes.
At the Somme, no man's land make a small find of potentially huge significance.
It's a button. It's got text on it. British Medical Corps button. The RAMC, the Royal Army Medical Corps. Can you wait a sec? Can you leave that, Leslie? It's a big one. It's off the front of a tunic. Each regiment has a single medical officer within the regiment. Andy's the real expert about this. He'll tell you more about this.
Military historian Andy Robertshaw is an expert on medical aspects of the Great War.
That button there gives us a clue as to just how far forward the doctors actually are on the battlefield. They are right up with the troops. Result of that is the death of over 700 medical officers. That's a very, very high number. But what it means is that the soldiers are always confident if you're wounded, you're very close to your own doctor, you'll be looked after and you'll be taken away in this evacuation chain, gets you off the battlefield as quickly as possible.
And his next find is more evidence of a doctor on the front line.
What we've just found is really very interesting. They're a very special item. They're the end of a tube which originally was full of alcohol. In the alcohol was suture, surgical thread. The only people to use these this far forward is a very small group of people. Every battalion of soldiers has one regimental medical officer, the RMO. He works with a very, very small team of people and the stretcher bearers, bringing the wounded back and then dealing with them. He is the person that would take this, break it open and do something to sew up a wounded soldier. Right now what it suggests to me is that just behind where I'm standing there was at some point during the battle a doctor at work on those wounded who were coming back down the system.
One medical officer at a specific place at a specific time at Beaumont Hamel on the first day of the Somme. Can the team trace him? The first day of the Battle of the Somme saw more casualties than any other day in British military history. 57,240, of whom more than 19,000 died. Nearly 3/4 of the injured had terrible wounds caused by high explosive shells, made worse from machine gun fire. Never before had the doctors been required to treat so many with such extensive face and head injuries. Shattered jaws, noses and lips torn off, and gaping skull wounds. But the Great War was fought with more than just artillery.
As usual, Alex has found something, just for a change, chemical.
Digging down where the British bullets were found, the team has uncovered what looks like a chemical weapon.
Here we've hit, I've hit a piece of roundy tin or metal.
They think it's a device that fired 30-pound drums of gas at the enemy. Each drum with a charge that would cause it to burst when it hit the ground. Cheap, crude, effective. And if the container of gas is still there, highly dangerous.
Just putting a chemical suit on just in case it is what we think it is. Better to be safe than sorry.
No Man's Land member Bill Shuttleworth is a bomb disposal expert.
If it leaks or anything or it shows up as a chemical, it'll speckle that chemical detector paper. Bit of an early warning thing. Okay, guys, you better go. Please don't come over. See you later.
The Germans were the first to use gas weapons in the Great War, but the British soon caught up and created a cheap and simple firing device called the Livens projector. After what seemed like hours, Bill returned safe but sweaty.
Look at that! If it wasn't anything, it looks like a Livens projector that was just been dumped and filled. Cleaned it out, pulled half of it out anyway and put it on the side for you to play with. This is a silly job. I took my top off. I'm get a state of it. Oh, cheers, mate. Sweat. Oh. We dug that next little circular item out, and it turned out to be a toilet, an old tin latrine. Some you win, some you lose.
I think it's a latrine, or it's been used as a latrine, and they're latrine buckets in situ.
You think?
Or in this case, in situ.
Well, quite literally.
You have several thousand men operating in this area, all of whom have got to perform bodily functions in a manner that is not going to cause disease. So there are quite large numbers of latrines, and it looks as if this pit has, at least at some stage in its existence, been a latrine. And there are battalion sanitary men whose responsibility it is to keep the place spick and span and get rid of the contents. Of course, actually moving the contents to a place where you can dispose of them doesn't always make you terribly popular, particularly in a crowded trench where there's scope for accidents, which there were sometimes.
The sanitary men came under the orders of the regimental medical officer whose button has been found. It made sense. Contaminated soil and appalling standards of hygiene threatened the health of soldiers and infected the wounded. The regimental aid post may be nearby.
We got it well up at the front, behind the position of the 1st Border Regiment, I think.
And No Man's Land member John Price is on the trail of the medical officer who ran it.
It's very well preserved, isn't it? That's a button off a medical officer's tunic.
Most buttons tell you nothing. Most buttons are mass-produced. All soldiers wear them, they're identical. But this button is unusual. It's really very exciting because only one officer would be wearing this type of button at this place at this time.
Official records place the 1st Battalion Border Regiment at the site where the button was found on July the 1st, 1916.
OK, here's the monthly army list for July 1916.
This lists who?
This lists all the commissioned officers in the army.
Right.
So if we look, here we are, Border Regiment, 1st Battalion, you said.
Right, so here he is.
Ah,
Walmsley, WAM. There he is.
Oh, brilliant. Yep.
Walmsley MB. What's the... Oh, that's his medical qualification,
Yes,
isn't it?
Bachelor of Medicine.
And what's this June 16 thing?
Oh, that's his date of commission as a temporary captain in the Royal Army Medical Corps.
Wow, so we know that he was a captain for 1 month when he lost that button.
Captain William Bunting Walmsley, regimental medical officer at Beaumont Hamel on the 1st day of the Somme.
Captain Walmsley would have been wearing a uniform almost identical to this in cut and appearance. This shows the rank of captain. Always worn on the left arm is the Geneva Cross, indicating that this man is a doctor. And down here, buttons. It has 5 buttons down the middle. For an officer, they are normally brass with the regimental or corps badge upon them. They would have been here. My one actually, somewhat lazy, these ones are made of leather. But one of those 5 buttons would have been the button that was lost.
Captain Walmsley would have run the regimental aid post, just off the Carlisle Street communication trench that No Man's Land are seeking. Conditions here were basic, but offered some form of refuge for immediate treatment, before being sent to the main dressing station further back from the front.
If people can just give a hand and get the gear over here, we'll tell you where we want it. Stretchers can come last. Just start with the 2 panniers. This weekend, what we are doing is just a small number of us getting together to practice some of the drills that they would have gone through in the Great War. And frankly, it's exactly what Dr. Walmsley would have been doing himself. He was the RMO, the Regimental Medical Officer of a battalion. He would have had 16 stretcher bearers and a couple of orderlies. So what we've got here is the sort of thing he would have done in camp whenever he got the chance, just to make sure that the men he was sending over the top to collect the wounded and his own men back in the regimental aid post knew what to do. Because once they were in action, they couldn't keep running back and asking questions.
William Bunting Walmsley was promoted to captain just a month before he had to deal with the carnage of the Somme. John is hoping to find out what he did before. The British Medical Association in London holds records that could be helpful.
Okay, so in 1914 his address is somewhat different. Care of the Wesleyan Mission, Canton, China. Wesleyan Mission, that means he's a Methodist. Well, that's quite an interesting trajectory.
John's discovery was totally unexpected. Captain Walmsley was a missionary doctor on the other side of the world, in China. A search through the records of the Methodist Church leads him to a pretty spa town in Middle England.
We know that he was born on the 26th of February 1876 in Pontefract, Yorkshire. We know that his father, J.M. Walmsley, was a reverend. The Reverend Walmsley was a Methodist. The Methodist ministers used to send their children to a school in Bath. Walmsley was sent here aged 15 in 1891. There he is.
Yes, there he is, and that's his own writing. He
right.
Enters his own name in.
This is his hand.
Yes, that's his own handwriting. Must show you this because we have a picture.
You're joking.
Oh, we have a picture.
Good Lord.
When he was in the upper fifth, that's a year before he left.
So how did a Methodist boy from Yorkshire end up as a missionary in the Far East?
In 1891, it was decided that there would be some missionary meetings in the school. Something like a dozen speakers going through their own experiences. But I think the most significant was a Reverend W.T.A. Barber. He had been out in the mission field in China and, according to the record, spoke very convincingly about the work needed to be done.
They were certainly spectacular because Mr. Barber appeared in the costume of a Chinese student, so it would have made quite a big
Yes,
crowd.
very dramatic effect. It may well be the kind of meeting that Walmsley would have been inspired by.
Walmsley left Kingswood School holding his missionary zeal in check. He trained as a doctor in Manchester, then left for Asia. But why did he leave God's work in China for the blood and mud of the Somme?
Look at this here. Wire, 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 wire. And I suppose these systems are just going out of use as they get snapped. If they can't repair them, just lay another load of wire in.
The Great War saw widespread use of the telephone. Trench warfare was static, perfect for laying the wires essential for early phone communication. Cables snaking from the brigade headquarters along trenches would ring bells or buzzers at the front. They were simple lines with earth returns. The ground was vibrating with information, and anyone with a listening device, including the enemy, could plug into the earth and hear what was being said almost 2 miles away.
This actually is early war, single strand cable.
We knew what we were doing.
And that is same period. This one I think is later. Yep, that's multi-strand armoured.
So
That's nice.
How later is that?
Don't know, it's probably just later in the war generally. Hang on, just 2 seconds. Yeah, that's our armoured cable. Well, that could be 1915 single system. Then later on in the war, the cables get more and more complicated. And in fact, I wonder whether this down here, yeah, that's insulated wire. Rather than that, I think we've got a great profusion of wire, isn't there?
So many different wires from so many periods can mean only one thing.
There seems to be more of it around here than we found in other trenches on other sites, but we are potentially very close to the brigade headquarters, and that would have had a lot of communications coming in and out of it. So unlike just a general bit of the line where they might only have the odd telephone, all lines are leading to somewhere very near here, so you'd expect there to be a mass of cables going in all directions. And the problem with them is, as we've seen in there, it's very thin wire, and any sorts of traffic up and down the trench or shell fire or whatever, it's very vulnerable to being broken. What do you got there?
If the wires got broken, orders did not get through. And if the wires were working, orders could be overheard. Both these things happened at Beaumont Hamel with catastrophic results.
2 attacks happen. They're meant to happen at the same time. It doesn't occur that way because the brigadier simply cannot communicate. Right now, I could stand up virtually and shout to the people back there to say, don't attack, do attack now, to plan it. On the 1st of July, with the men aware that if you put your head up, you're going to get shot, the only way to communicate is by means of runners or those telephones, which are now no longer working.
A phone call was used to launch the attack by the Newfoundland Regiment serving with the British at Beaumont Hamel. But no one knew that an earlier phone call about the planned attack had been picked up by the Germans, who were ready and waiting. The team's dig site is next to a park in which the Caribou Memorial commemorates Newfoundland's sacrifice in the Great War. Of the Newfoundland Regiment, it said, "No other unit suffered so heavily in proportion to the number of men engaged." Those young men who fell on the first day of the Somme had come from a tightly knit community over 3,000 miles away that still grieves the loss of its youth. More than 1 in 3 of Newfoundland's 19 to 35-year-old men enlisted during the war, and 10% of the total male population. There were a lot of Catholic families with many children, and it was common for bands of brothers to go off to war together. Brothers like the Dirty Herders, a hockey-playing trio from a Methodist family who had had 12 children and whose father published the local paper. Arthur, Ralph, and Hubert Herder, athletic, educated, and in search of adventure. No Man's Land David Kenyon has journeyed to Newfoundland to seek out the Herders' living relatives.
These are in good condition.
They weren't allowed to discuss hockey because they were all on different teams and they used to argue and fight. So no, hockey was not allowed to be mentioned at any meal.
Well, even when you were joining the Pee-wee's hockey team, you were called Dirty Herder.
Mm. So was my husband.
But he was. They like to win the game. Right?
Newfoundland, now a part of Canada, was a self-governing dominion of Britain when the Great War began. It immediately promised Britain it would recruit, train, and equip a fighting force of 500 of its best and brightest men. Hubert Herder was the third to sign up. His brother Ralph, number 34. Arthur was a barrister living at Moose Jaw in Canada at the time. He joined up with the Canadians, and off they all went to war. They had no idea what lay in store. At the site of the Battle of the Somme, No Man's Land continues to make finds.
What is it?
You can see the puncture in the tin where he's punctured the lid. It must have had condensed milk or something in it,
Yeah.
possibly.
Is there a jackknife mark on it?
Have a look.
I know what it is. It's a standard tin opener. Civilian type, which I've got one of. Need to look after that because that's really nice. It's just a little moment in time, frozen. Someone punched a hole through it, one on the other side, poured out the condensed milk. Okay. Whenever I do it, I just manage to slip and cut my hand open.
What we've got here is quite an interesting item. It looks as if it's probably part of a stopwatch. You can see where the winder goes through there. One of the things that happened on the 30th of June before the men went over the top was that they an officer went back to brigade headquarters, which was in this area, and he actually got a watch which was synchronized so that everybody was working on exactly the right time, because for things like artillery bombardments it's absolutely crucial. It's not as casual as missing a train because your watch is wrong. Men's lives depend on getting the time right.
This is the communication trench, which is shown on trench maps as Carlisle Street.
Carlisle Street was the communication trench leading to the regimental aid post where Captain Walmsley tended the wounded. A main thoroughfare where munitions, men and casualties were allowed through in that order of importance.
Knife, fork, spoon.
The medical post could be close by.
Piece of soap.
What I'm finding as I'm going down into it is stacks and stacks of sandbags. We're getting very nice weave patterns coming up on these sandbags. The soil around them is just falling away. This is an archaeological dream, really. This here looks like the Hessian bag. You can see the pattern there, the crisscross, but it is in fact actually just mud and breaks away quite easily.
Evidence of sandbags is all over the place, particularly around the site of the excavated latrines. The team want to discover what else might be there.
Damn.
It's in the tin.
This just, I'm afraid, got broken. They're very delicate. It's an iodine ampule. It's part of every field dressing for a British soldier. It goes in your pocket and it's a little cardboard tube. And when you're wounded, you pour the iodine onto the dressing and slap it onto the wound. The men that went over the top on the 1st of July 1916 were all told what to do with these things. But the great danger was pouring it straight into the wound. I never thought I'd end up having Great War iodine on my hand, but I have got it now. But they are just so thin and so delicate. There it is, you can see the colour of the liquid in there. It's incredibly delicate. Okay. I mean, what you could do is just
shovel proof. There's some more bits.
Another one. What more bits of the?
Yeah, there were several in a little.
Several.
Like, in a little tin.
Have they survived?
No. Unfortunately, I spaded the tin.
I'm going to show the lads around this corner, shall I?
Hang on a minute. Can we just go through the spoil carefully? There may be nothing in there. Don't get it in your eye.
I'll endeavour not to.
Not a problem, just go blind. Gentlemen, I have good news for you. We didn't smash them all. I've got 2 on my hand now.
Fantastic.
Look, there they are. Incredible. They're so delicate. The fact that we broke one was sad, but the others surviving is amazing. And basically, every soldier gets one. The only people that get more than those are RMOs, Regimental Medical Officers. And they have a tin full. And we've just got them. I have a tin, I have those. I'm just... It's, you know, in terms of finding medical items from the Great War, I've always wanted to do that, and I've just done it. Ready? They were just on the top there. This lot can go in there now, if you like. I'll give them the bucket back, okay? Okay. What we've got here is the contents of what was known as the medical companion. Inside this are all the items a doctor would need in the field. What we've got is a range of different sorts of tourniquets. This could be put on round a limb and then tightened up. The final tightening up being twisting this to simply stop that flow of blood. Of course you need spare dressings, and those ones are the one that every soldier would carry sewn into his uniform. I've got a pocket for mine here where you might need spares of those. These are spare iodine ampules, actually exactly the same as the ones found in the pit at Beaumont Hamel. We've found those still with the iodine inside them. And these are a set of original surgeon's needles from the middle of the Great War. And with them I was able to get these. And these are the little tubes of suture. And it was pieces of those tubes that were found at Beaumont Hamel. We've got a special lamp which only ever used by stretcher bearers and by doctors. Very, very small, no glass in it at all, and designed so we can actually fasten it to clothing, and then that can then be used to illuminate the patient while we're working. And there it is. set of instruments, probes, scissors, clamps, and actually more suture for sewing up our patients. For the patient who is very severely injured, we need to administer morphine, and that is the series of needles and the syringe used to administer that.
The medical officer at this place on the Somme on the 1st of July was Captain William Bunting Walmsley. But what brought a missionary doctor in China to the war in Europe? The team may have discovered the answer.
It's a letter. Oh, this is crucial because we were discussing exactly this question. What was it that inspired him to join, given that he was in China?
Yes.
No Man's Land have found a letter written by the future Captain Walmsley in 1915.
Coming to China in obedience to the call of God, I feel I can only leave by his direct guidance.
Now he's got this sort of calling to come back to serve in the army.
I'm of the conviction that the Prussians must be defeated, or much that we hold precious will suffer, and even foreign missionary work will receive a serious setback. I heard there was an urgent need for medical men at the front, and I couldn't bear to think that the men who are shedding their blood and enduring hardship on our behalf should suffer through lack of adequate medical attention. As I definitely prayed for guidance, the conviction deepened. I offered my services last Thursday, was medically examined, and have been recommended for temporary commission in the RAMC. This is an exceptional person because he is absolutely got a vocation to do the right thing to help his fellow men. There aren't that many people like that around.
Walmsley set sail for England, arriving in the summer of 1915. Around the same time, lawyer Arthur Herder, serving with the Canadians and the eldest of the family's children, is getting himself into trouble. David Kenyon has dug up a family secret, a piece of dirty Herder history.
It would appear that he got as far as France with the Canadian Army, and in the course of 1915 he was accused of drunkenness and court-martialed. He was accused of drunkenness on the line of march, as it says, and he pled not guilty, and as a result of the court-martial he was discharged. He was discharged from service, and he tried to challenge the verdict of the court-martial. He was a Cambridge lawyer. He knew when he'd been stitched up, and or he certainly felt that there'd been an injustice done. And through his father's influence and the authorities here in Newfoundland were able to get him back into the army. But by 1916, he's made it back to lieutenant again. So he was obviously a very capable man.
Okay.
So I think. We shouldn't read too much into his initial court-martial.
If it was just drunkenness, and some herders have had
That must have been a family secret. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh, it was a deep, dark secret until right now.
Until we blew it to the whole world. Yeah.
By 1916, Arthur Herder has not only made it back to lieutenant, he's also joined forces in the Newfoundland Regiment with his two brothers, the three of them destined for the Somme. The site of the iodine find has surrendered another medical item.
It's a medical thermometer. A medical thermometer. There you go. But it's got a maker's name on it and everything.
So we have. You couldn't invent this. All the things I've ever wanted to find on the Western Front, this has got to be it.
Having looks all over the battlefield, thinking there might be something medical to do with this area, to find iodine ampules, to find even just that small piece of broken thermometer, says that somewhere around here, it's not very far away, there was something medical going on. That says to me regimental aid post.
The team have found the regimental aid post, the station where Captain Walmsley tended the injured and dying. If the Herder brothers had been hurt in the attack, this is where they could have been treated. In the late spring of 1916, the Herder brothers and the Newfoundland Regiment arrived in front of Beaumont Hamel to prepare for the Somme. As residents of a dominion of Britain, they were classed as British soldiers.
This is a frontline village utilised by the British soldiers. Its name is Auchanville, but the Tommy soldier called it Auchan, Ocean Villas, just like the ocean. And that's its nickname, Ocean Bloody Villas.
Avril Williams runs a bed and breakfast in a village close to Beaumont Hamel. Her home is right in the middle of the Somme lines and acts as the unofficial brigade headquarters for the men of no man's land. The team first got to know her when they excavated a trench that runs through her land, one of the trenches the herder boys may have used.
It led straight down to the front lines in front of Beaumont Hamel, where the Newfoundlanders would have fought.
In the days leading up to the attack, the Allies mounted deafening and incessant artillery bombardment of German lines. But unknown to the Allies, the Germans are safe, deep in dugouts carved into the chalky ground. Allied raiding parties are sent out to cut the masses of barbed wire in preparation for the infantry attack on July 1st.
Before the attack, members of the 29th Division went out and cut a series of staggered gaps, which they hoped the Germans couldn't detect, but would allow our troops to go through. The problem of doing that, of course, is it then funnels the attackers into those pre-cut gaps. And all the enemy machine guns have to do on the far slope, in weather very much like we've got now, good sunshine, good visibility, is to fire into those gaps. Unless you're incredibly lucky, you're going to walk into a wall of lead, because the Germans aren't spraying around their machine guns, they're simply letting you walk into it, knowing that there are only certain ways through. Most of the men in this area never got into the German wire, and particularly for the Newfoundland Regiment, most men fell where we are now.
On the night before the battle, as the officers collect their synchronized watches, the troops take up their positions.
They had to come through Mailly, through this sunken lane here, and up the railway track. This is a railway track where they met the bigger Broadway, Tipperary avenues, the avenues that would have carried them through into the front line. There's an element of excitement. You're excited because you're actually doing something, you're on the move. The worst thing was to be stopped at Tipperary Avenue, and then the fear starts, because you can hear, you can't see, it's pitch black. The fear would have started to creep in then, because they had those terrible hours to wait until 0 hour.
As the sun comes up on July the 1st, 1916, Captain William Bunting Walmsley checks his supplies.
On the 1st of July 1916, Captain Walmsley would have got his orderly to ensure that everything was together that he would require. All the dressings, all the drugs. And vitally importantly, he would have been getting the stretcher bearers to check the number of stretchers, make sure there were ground sheets, blankets, the water bottles are all full, because he knew all this would be vitally important in the hours ahead. Once the battle began, it was impossible to get new supplies up to him. Everything had to be ready, easily at hand, because in the next few hours, anything that wasn't there would mean lost lives.
The Newfoundland Regiment and the Herder brothers were in the line closest to him. They were to be the final wave in the attack. Each man was carrying around 66 pounds of kit, intended to sustain them in their occupation of the German position. But they were so weighed down it was hard to climb out of the trenches. Running was virtually impossible. In a letter from the front dated July the 6th, 1916, only days after the offensive begins, Captain Walmsley writes home to his mother. The attack started at 7:30 a.m. and a very strong emotion, I watched our men climb over the parapet and make for the German trenches. The wounded soon began to come, and I was kept very busy most of the next 30 hours. Those cases that couldn't walk, I made go into deep dugouts to be treated. These dugouts were naturally very ill ventilated, and the heat and the smell of blood made it very disagreeable working in them. Someday I shall be able to speak more fully of these days.
When Dr. Walmsley was working in those trenches, it would have been the most intensive experience he's ever had with dealing with patients. Everybody around him would have been working under tremendous pressure. They would have been making mistakes, they would have been dropping things, they would have been running out of things very rapidly. There would have been incredible frustration, but trying to reassure the patients all the time that they were going to be all right, it wasn't too severe, probably knowing full well that wasn't true.
A support attack 30 minutes later went ahead as planned. The men again mown down by heavy machine gun and artillery fire. By now, Carlisle Street communication trench is chaos. The wounded trying to make it to Captain Walmsley, the dying jamming up their route, lying with their packs where they fell.
Problem is now is that if there's any number of people coming back towards me, they're going to be runners with information, with messages, they're going to be the wounded making their way back, worse still, wounded on stretchers. If I come down this way, there is no way to get past them. The only thing I can do with that level of congestion is to look at it, decide, no, 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 we can't make our way forward. We've been given a time to jump off and attack the enemy position. The commanding officer says, right, we can't go through the trenches. It's on the top, lads. We'll do it that way. That way we're actually in position for the correct time. It's a fatal decision.
A telephone call to the Newfoundland Regiment sends the Herder brothers over the top to very different fates. The cellar of Averell Williams' home was a dressing station for the wounded from the Battle of the Somme.
The Herder brothers, they would have been brought back to places like this. From the front line, they came to the first aid post, which Walmsley would have been in, then to this one, which is a dressing station. This is to keep the man alive again, and then as soon as they were patched up, back behind the lines.
Ralph Herder is shot but makes it back to be treated. He returns to Newfoundland and survives the war.
Down here on the day, it would have been chaos. It's something they've never seen before. So many men trying to get back. You had stretcher bearers coming in and out. There would have been a lot of noise. The shelling would have been deafening. You had a lot of men screaming because what do you do when you're in such fear? And I find that absolutely unbearable to think that they were down here screaming, shouting, asking for help, and they couldn't get it.
Lawyer Arthur Herder is badly injured with shrapnel and bullet wounds to his arms and chest. He recovers but is sent back to the front. He's killed by a sniper's bullet the following year. Of Hubert, there is no word.
This place is my garden. On the 1st of July, a lot of the Newfoundlanders would have come back this way to the dressing station, and if they didn't quite make it, they would have been buried here, and we had evidence of them being buried here. We found these poppers from ground sheets, which indicate that that's how they buried them. So this is a burial ground for a lot of the Newfoundlanders that came past this way to try and get back to the casualty clearing station at Maie.
On July 2nd, the Newfoundland regiments had a roll call. 68 men answered their names. The regiment that started the 1st of July was nearly 800 men. Now, just a day later, 710 men were either killed, wounded, or missing.
After a huge battle, after all the carnage and destruction, there comes an enormous peace. And that's what's here. It's that peace. It's a paradise almost. I think you live with death, and yes, it is sad, but life has to go on. And this is why I have animals and I have life. We must never forget what they gave, but we have to respect and remember what they gave us. Aren't we lucky to live in this environment? Aren't we lucky to have the birds singing, the chickens free, all the animals free? We're so lucky. And really, that's what they gave us. They gave us this huge gift of life.
On July the 7th, 1916, 6 days after the battle, the Herder family in Newfoundland find out that Hubert was killed in action, going over the top on the first day of the Somme. Most of his regiment not even making it past the British front line.
See the merchant stand in wonder, what is this?
And what of Regimental Medical Officer Captain William Bunting Walmsley? He is wounded in 2 battles the following year and awarded the Military Cross. He returns to missionary work in China with his wife and ends his career as a general practitioner in the northern town of Manchester, England, where he trained. On Boxing Day in 1946, he dies, aged 70.
To rise no more. Babylon is fallen, is fallen, is fallen. Babylon is fallen to rise no more. Sound the trumpet on Mount Zion.
It's all clean now, the photos are taken, so I think we're done. I think we came here to find the 1st of July, and I think we found it. I think it's here, and hopefully we've shown that those grassy humps over there, although they give one impression of the Newfoundland trenches, this muddy hole over here gives a slightly different one.
No Man's Land has teased the past from this dry earth, reuniting 3 long-dead brothers from Newfoundland and breathing life into the doctor who tended them, who on the 1st of July 1916 ministered to the fallen.